Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to do a quick demo for you on some suggestions for mixing colors. So you can see that as we head into the color projects, the preliminary exercises become really important. We want to really build on what we did with our value exercises to get sensitive to the range of values we can create and be thinking about how to accurately mix and create color combinations. So I'm going to start actually by making some secondary colors, which would be a mixture of two primaries. So I'm taking some of the red that I've established, picking it up with a palette knife, I'm placing it here on this palette. I'm going to wipe off the excess so that I don't get red into the next color that I pick up, which will be yellow. Pick up some yellow, roughly equal amount. Place that side by side. I'm going to mix those together here rather than mixing them with a brush to try to create my orange. I'm using a metal palette knife to do this. I'm mixing it almost like cake frosting. Scraping it up, using the palette knife to kind of mix it by turning it together, pressing down, collecting the group up. Now, that doesn't seem light enough to me. I think I need more yellow. I'll wipe off the knife again so I don't get that color into my yellow. Some clean yellow and add that. Getting closer. Now, ideally, a 50-50 mix would do exactly what you want, but of course, we're dealing with reality here. So this particular brand of paints that I have, the red pigment is much, much stronger, so I'm going to have to go for a more 75% yellow, I think, to red. I'm going to make a fair amount of orange because I'm going to use this for a couple different purposes. I'm going to use it to create my orange tints and shades, lighter and darker versions, and also to make my tertiary colors where I have more yellow and some more red than the other. There we go. That's pretty close. Now, of course, I'm going to be using this to create a value scale. And I think that the smartest thing to do here would actually be to paint this on a separate piece of paper, let it dry, and then cut the sections out that I want to use as small tiles that I can glue into my project. So I'm going to take this orange, divide it into 3 parts. Okay. So some of the orange I'll be using just to make tints and shades of orange by adding white to some, black to the other. But I'm going to manipulate these 2 areas of my orange to create the tertiaries, red, orange, and yellow, orange. So with some of that, I'm going to add more red to create the tertiary color, red, orange. It's going to be much darker. There we go. I want to go even a little darker than that. Okay. So you can see the difference in value here to the original orange to my new red orange. I'm now going to make yellow orange by adding yellow into this area. I'm just going to lighten this bit significantly. I might even want to add a little more. So I'm trying to keep the colors clean on my palette, wiping the knife in between each change. Thoroughly mixing. It's much easier to mix with the knife than it is with the paintbrush. Great, so now I've got orange, yellow, orange, and red orange. I then want to start thinking about making some areas lighter and darker by adding black and white to create my tints and shades. So I'm actually going to do some of this on this Bristol board. I'm going to take a little bit of my base orange and paint an area a little bit bigger than that 1 by 3/4 of an inch that I need. for my color value scale. Pick up with a different brush my yellow orange. That over to the side of this one. And my red orange. Now the red orange, I'm going to end up making 4 values darker even than this. 4 tints darker than what you see right there. So I'm going to achieve that by taking a little bit of black. I mean a little bit, because the black is your strongest pigment. Take a very small amount and mix it in thoroughly to darken this up. Now, when you add black, it's going to make the color a little less intense, a little duller. It will definitely make it darker. Take that one step darker. Put it right beside the original here. A little more black. Really mix that. This is definitely making a darker value here. A little more black. Just going to keep doing that. You can see that I'm creating an area over here that I can then use to cut sections out to create my color value scale in the project. Should have some nice transitions of value in it. Okay. Now we should go the other way. Move this out of my way. Take some of that red orange we started with and add a little bit of white to it. More. So you can see that I've created several different value options here with my red orange. Both the black and the white are pretty powerful pigments, so they will have a pretty dramatic effect on changing your values. Flip this around so you can see my yellow-orange side. I'll take my yellow-orange, divide it in half. The lower section, I'm going to add a tiny bit of black to make this my darker version of yellow-orange. way. One more black. The yellow-orange, I'm going to be making several gradations. Need at least 6. Should be about my 4th one. More. Now you could brave up and do the painting directly on the Bristol board that you're using for your value scale. I am choosing instead to paint mine out this way so that I can cut it, take the sections that I want, and glue them into my design. And that's going to give me a little bit more control over my value mixing. I do want to try to keep each of the columns in the value scale the same relative value. So this last yellow-orange shade, we call it a shade when we add black, should be pretty close in value to the last shade I made of my red-orange. Okay. Get that out of the way. Going back to that yellow-orange at the beginning, add a little bit of white to it. More. More. One more. All right, so now we've got a nice range of yellow-orange shades where we've added black. There's our base, and tints where we've added white. And they are fairly similar in value to the steps that we created here with the red-orange. So even though these are much larger blobs than what I'm going to put into the final project, once this is dry, I'll be able to cut it apart and glue it together. So we still should do the orange in the middle. So I'm just going back to the palette, grabbing the original orange that we created, dividing that in half, adding a little bit of black to it, create my first shade. One more. Okay. For our lighter tints, adding white to the mix. We're only going to need about 4 of these. All right. So that's the basic idea of creating a base secondary color, manipulating it by adding more of one primary. So in this case, red plus yellow makes orange. So our darker version here is our red-orange, and our lighter version is yellow-orange. The secondaries are always named for the primary that's dominant in the mix. We added increasing small amounts of black in this direction to create increasingly dark shades. We added increasing amounts of white in this direction to make increasingly lighter tints. So ultimately, this kind of gradation that I have here can be cut and pasted into our grid. Now the grid is going to be set up this way. All right. So I now have the 12 colors of my color wheel as horizontal rows. And I wanted to arrange them in such a way that the lighter colors would have their base hue closer to the left side, and the darker colors would have their base hue closer to the right side. So I started with my primaries yellow, blue, and red. Blue and red are very, very close together, and they're fairly dark on this end of the value scale. Yellow, of course, as its base is a very light color. So the way this is arranged is so that your base colors should get increasingly dark as we go down and to the right. So rather than going in a spectrum, we're really dealing more in terms of their base values. So the first horizontal row is yellow, followed by yellow-green, should be about the same base value as our yellow-orange, and orange about the same as our blue-violet. Next, red, orange, and blue-green at about the same base, blue and red-violet at about the same base, red and green and violet, purple, all about the same this way. We're going to be making lighter tints in this direction and darker shades in this direction. And the goal is that each vertical set should be very close together in value. Now, that being said, we've just made some very, very light mixtures a variety of colors. The one that I just finished with was my lightest tint on orange. So I could go to my orange row here and paint in this light value. So I've already got it mixed up, just so you get a sense of how this will work. I also have the lightest value of my yellow-orange. You can see they are really pretty close together in value, which is just what we want. I also have my lightest red-orange. Should be about here. I also have my darker values, my darkest shades. I go ahead and put in my darkest red-orange. Looks like I used up my absolute darkest orange, but I do have some of my darkest yellow orange. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in here. Just so you get a sense of how these will look. So obviously, the colors that you're going to be mixing from base yellow, red, and blue, adding just black and white. So probably the hardest color to make will be purple, in that purple is going to go very much more toward the blue and very, very dark very easily, so you may need to add a fair amount of white to get a decent purple or violet. The greens are also going to be sometimes difficult to create. I am using a cadmium yellow pale and cobalt blue, and those should give me a pretty decent green. My purple may come out a little bit more on the blue side and a little bit darker. So just be aware that you will get variations based on the brands and the types of paint that you have, but what we're trying to go for is to keep the vertical columns essentially the same value. So I took a photograph in color of my base yellow, my base blue, and my base red, and then I put them into a grayscale so I could kind of guesstimate what this column under the red, the values for everything should be in that range. The values for the column here that contains the blue should be here, and this vertical column containing the yellow should be roughly in this value range. So that's going to give me an idea of how light or how dark I should be in that given area. So we could take our base yellow, for example, or base blue rather, and try to mix tint by adding white. It comes close to what that value of the yellow would be in the base yellow vertical column. So I've just taken a little bit of white and I've mixed it in here with my blue. Now I'm comparing to the gray. Like that's still a little dark. Much better. Maybe even a little too light. So my blue should be about this range here, where it falls under the yellow. The yellow, as it approaches the blue end of things, is going to get really quite dark in this area. So I've just taken yellow and added a little bit of black to it, which is making it go slightly green, of course. That still seems a little bit pale. It needs to be a little darker than that in that area. Much better. It's pretty close. So the yellow, by the time it gets to that zone, will be making lighter tints to the left, darker shades to the right. By the time I get to the area directly above the base hue of blue, I should be somewhere in this value range. Slightly darker for the area right above the red. Go. So you can see that we'll be getting pretty dark values by the time we get to this end and very, very light tints as we get to this end. I'm going to try to do a purple for you really quick. And a green. I'm just using a piece of freezer paper as my palette. You could use an old container from a plastic storage container, like the lid from a Tupperware jar, for example. I'll try to make a purple, or proper name, of course, violet. You can see that that blue is really strong. And that's my cobalt blue. So I do think that that is just a little bit darker than I really want it to be, a little bluer than I want it to be. So I'm going to add some red. And I'm going to add a bit of blue back in. I think I've gone a little too far with the red. It is still a tiny bit dark, so I'm going to add just a touch of white. Just a little more. So definitely the purples or violets are going to be one of your more challenging areas. Violet goes right there. And that is maybe a little dark for my taste. I might make it a little bit lighter, in fact, but that gives us a good place to start from. And I'll make a green as well. I'll be very conservative with how much blue I add to this. It's quite a powerful pigment. It's reading a little bit more like yellow-green to me. So I'm going to take just a little more of that blue. closer to what you think of from a crayon box. That's pretty good. That's my base, but it does seem like it might be a little light. Maybe add just a little more blue to it. Let's see what it looks like when it dries. If I squint at those, the values come a little bit closer together. You can also try playing around with your camera. You could take a photograph and then put it into grayscale to start seeing what those values might look like. So remember, this was a photograph of my yellow, my base blue, my base red, photographed, then put them into grayscale so you can kind of gauge my values. So you can see as I look across the colors that have mixed up to this point, that green I just made does seem like it's a little bit too light compared to other things in that particular vertical column. So I think I may add just a little more blue to it to get it to fit in with its neighbors. So you can work in a couple different ways. You could go ahead and paint each color individually in each box. Some people find that very helpful. I personally think it's going to be easier for most of us to do this type of thing where you're making all of your values lighter and darker, and then you can go in and cut out the sections that you want and fit them into your value chart. You could also try playing with your camera, taking a photograph of the whole thing to see if you put it in a grayscale, if the values are reading the right way. Again, you want lighter tints to the left and darker shades to the right.